I still remember the way her fingers trembled in mine the day I boarded that bus. It was spring, but in our little town of Elmswood, the air felt heavier than usual, as if the breeze itself knew we were about to break. Her name was Mary. 19, soft-spoken, the kind of girl who wore summer dresses even in the fall just because they made her feel like the world wasn't so gray. She was my everything. And I was hers, until the letter came. Mr. William Carter, it began, you are hereby ordered for induction into the Armed Forces of the United States. I didn't cry when I read it. Not then. But when I looked into her eyes, blue as the lakes we swam in every summer, I saw fear. Not the kind you scream about. The kind you swallow whole. We spent our last week walking the old train tracks behind her dad's farm, talking about nothing and everything. She braided a thread bracelet for me, red and white, and tied it on my wrist like some ancient ritual. I swore I'd never take it off. I'll write you every chance I get, I told her that morning at the station, trying to sound brave. And when I come back, we'll get married under that oak tree behind your house. Just like you always wanted. She smiled, but her lips were trembling. Don't you dare stop writing. I'll be waiting. And just like that, I was gone. I shipped out within a week. Saigon was a nightmare made of red dust, sweat, and the sound of helicopters that never stopped buzzing. But every few days, I carved out moments to write her. I poured my soul into those letters. I told her about the heat, about Jimmy from Louisiana who played guitar after night patrol, about how I dreamed of her when the bullets were close. I told her that no matter what I saw, no matter how scared I got, I held on to her like an anchor. The first few weeks, I got letters back. Beautiful ones. She told me how the town felt empty without me. How she stopped going to the diner because the booth we always sat in made her cry. She told me she loved me more with every sunrise. And then, silence. No more letters. No more replies. At first, I thought it was the mail. The jungle messed with everything, logistics, mail, mines. But as weeks turned to months, doubt began to curl around my heart like smoke. Meanwhile, back in Elmswood, Mary was slipping into her own kind of war. She started going to the little white church off Main Street. Not during services, no, that would mean faces, whispers, and those awful looks people give the ones they pity. She didn't want pity. She wanted peace. So she started coming in the evenings, slipping into the back pews while the sun dipped below the pines. Just her, a candle, and quiet prayer. Father Malcolm noticed her. A man of the cloth for nearly 30 years, his sermons were the kind you forgot as soon as you left the building, but he had a voice that sounded like silk sliding over gravel. He started sitting with her. Talking to her. Praying with her. Mary told herself it helped. And maybe it did, for a time. What she didn't know, what I couldn't have imagined from halfway across the world, was that Father Malcolm had decided her soul wasn't the only thing he wanted to save. He saw her pain, her isolation, and slowly, methodically, began to twist it. He told her to give her grief to God. That the silence from the front was divine timing. That maybe my soul was already resting, and she needed to stop clinging to ghosts. And behind closed doors, something even darker began. It started with a small favor, asking the town's letter carrier, Thomas Reeve, a lonely man with debts and secrets, to deliver any mail from Vietnam directly to him. Malcolm told him it was to shield the girl's heart. But it wasn't. It was so he could keep the letters for himself. And each night, after service, after the candles had been snuffed out and the doors locked, Father Malcolm would pour himself a glass of whiskey, sit by the rectory's fire, and read my words. Words meant only for her. I still wear the bracelet, one letter said. The red's faded now, but it reminds me of you. Of hope. Another, I saw a boy today who couldn't have been more than 16. He didn't make it. I keep thinking, if I don't come home, will you remember my laugh? Malcolm would read until his eyes stung, then look into the fire and whisper, "Forgive me, Father." And then he'd burn the letter. One by one. Until only ashes remained. Mary stopped watching the mailbox after the third week. At first, she stood by the front window every morning like clockwork, eyes trained on the narrow gravel road that snaked past the porch. Her heart would flutter at the distant rumble of the mail truck, then sink as it drove by or left nothing but catalogs and bills. She told herself not to cry. Not in front of her mother. Not in front of the neighbors who already looked at her like a half-widow. So she turned inward. Quieter. More withdrawn. The church became her only refuge. Evening after evening, Mary would slip into the sanctuary like a ghost. The pews were always cold, the air smelled of melted wax and old wood, and the silence, God, the silence, was the only place where her thoughts didn't drown her. Father Malcolm was always nearby. At first, he simply nodded when he passed her, his eyes soft with what looked like concern. Then he began sitting beside her, just far enough to be respectful, but close enough for her to feel his presence. "It's all right to grieve," he'd say. "But don't forget to live." He always carried his Bible, but he rarely opened it. Instead, he talked to her about faith, about surrender, about finding peace in the unknown. And Mary clung to those words like a life raft. Because the alternative, that will had died out there, in some nameless jungle, alone, was too much. So when Malcolm offered to pray with her, she said yes. When he offered to walk her home in the dark, she said thank you. When he pressed a comforting hand to her shoulder that lingered too long, she tried not to flinch. She needed someone. And he knew it. Back at the rectory, Malcolm's war was one of shadows and guilt. Every time he opened one of my letters, his hands trembled. He told himself it was for Mary's good. That he was protecting her from false hope. That God would understand. But deep down, he wasn't lying to her. He was lying to himself. He read about the gunfire. About the nights I curled up under damp tarps, my fingers too numb to hold a pen. About how the only thing keeping me sane was the thought of her waiting for me. "You're the only clear thing left in my mind," one letter said. "When the chaos gets too loud, I picture you by the lake in that yellow dress, smiling." Malcolm would clench the page so hard it crumpled, then whisper, "Forgive me," before dropping it into the fire. Ashes danced upward like ghosts, and still he drank. Every flame swallowed another lie. Mary's visits became more frequent. They'd sit in the small chapel and read psalms. He'd let her cry, and she'd lean against his shoulder when the weight was too much. She stopped talking about me. Malcolm noticed. He began slipping his sermons into conversation, little parables about moving on, about opening one's heart to new blessings, about God sending unexpected answers to prayer. Mary listened. She didn't always agree, but she listened. And that was enough for the cracks to start. One night, after another tearful prayer, she looked up at him and whispered, "What if God's trying to tell me he's gone?" Malcolm didn't answer right away. He just placed his hand over hers and said, "Then maybe he's trying to bring you someone who's still here." Temptation isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a whisper in the dark. A flicker of comfort in a storm. Mary began dreaming about hands that weren't mine. Strong, sure hands that pressed comfort into her skin. She'd wake up ashamed, guilt pooling in her chest, and beg God for forgiveness. But the dreams didn't stop. And Malcolm, he stopped fighting. One evening, as she lit a candle at the altar, he stepped behind her and placed his hand at the small of her back. She didn't pull away. Not immediately. His voice was low. You don't have to be alone, Mary. She turned, eyes searching his. But I'm still his. You're God's, he whispered. And he's the one who sent me to you. Her lips parted, whether to speak, to pray, or to scream, she wasn't sure. And then, the chapel door creaked open. Startled, she stepped back. The spell broke. They said nothing. She left in silence. But they both knew something had changed. Meanwhile, halfway around the world, I sat in a muddy foxhole clutching the only letter I'd gotten in 2 months. It wasn't from her. It was from my mother. Mary hasn't written, she said. She's still grieving, I'm sure. But don't give up, Will. Come home to her. That night, we were ambushed. Mortars shook the jungle. I dragged a wounded private through thorned underbrush, praying my legs wouldn't give out. I was shot. Just a graze. But the blood was real. So was the fear. I lay in the dirt and clutched the bracelet on my wrist. Hold on for her, I whispered. I didn't know that as I bled into foreign soil, the woman I loved was losing herself to a man who wore a cross. And a lie. Mary didn't go back to church for 3 days after that night. She couldn't look at herself in the mirror. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Father Malcolm's face inches from hers, his voice echoing, "You don't have to be alone, Mary." But she was. More than ever. She tried to write to me. Sat down with pen and paper. Wrote one line, "I miss you so much I can't breathe," then ripped the page to pieces. What was she supposed to say? That she'd let another man touch her soul? That she had felt something? So she folded into silence. But temptation doesn't wait. It knocks. And if you don't answer, it finds the back door. On the 4th night, she went back to the chapel. Rain fell hard outside, tapping against the stained glass windows like fingers trying to break in. She just wanted to pray. Just a little peace. Malcolm was already there. He didn't say a word. Just lit a candle and sat beside her. Minutes passed in silence. And then he whispered, "I haven't stopped thinking about that night." Mary's jaw tightened. "I'm ashamed." "So am I," he said. "But I believe in grace." She stood, ready to leave. He gently caught her wrist. "Tell me you haven't thought about it too." Her breath caught in her throat. And in that one breath, that one moment of silence, she didn't pull away. Back at the rectory, the fire was roaring again. Another letter had arrived. Postmarked Saigon. Malcolm poured whiskey with shaking hands, slit the envelope with a butter knife, and read aloud to the flames. The days blur together. We lost 2 more boys yesterday. I keep thinking I could be next. But then I remember you. The way your hair falls across your face when you laugh. The freckles you hate, the ones I love. I live for the day I see you again, Mary. That's what keeps me alive. He read it twice. Then 3 times. And finally, with a choked apology to the empty room, he fed the paper into the fire. "I'm so sorry," he whispered to no one. "I'm not strong enough." Mary's struggle wasn't lust. Not at first. It was loneliness. Confusion. She had begged God for comfort, for a sign, for something. And Malcolm had been the only one who answered. Their meetings became more private. No more shared pews. Now it was late-night visits to the rectory, framed by thunder or starlight. He spoke of faith, of healing, of how she was meant for more than waiting. He kissed her the first time in the hallway. A moment suspended in breathlessness and fear. She didn't stop him. She cried afterward. He held her as she wept. I, meanwhile, was still fighting to stay alive. They'd been ambushed outside Key San. My unit took heavy fire. I watched a man bleed out holding a photo of his wife and newborn daughter. That night, I wrote again. Kneeling in the mud under a ripped tarp, my flashlight flickering. I don't know how much more I can take. But when I feel like giving up, I think of you. Your laugh. Your hand in mine. I'll make it back to you. I have to. I kissed the envelope, then handed it to a medic headed toward a field post. I never knew it wouldn't reach her. Back in Elmswood, Mary stopped going home some nights. She told her mother she was staying with a friend. She told herself it was just for comfort. Just for warmth. But she knew better. And so did Malcolm. They didn't speak about what they were doing. Not in words. But in glances. In touches. In nights spent in silent repentance followed by surrender. One evening, as she lay wrapped in a borrowed blanket on the rectory couch, she whispered, "What if he's still alive?" Malcolm looked into the fire. "Then may God forgive us both." And still, he didn't stop. Neither did she. When the first snow fell, Mary stood on the church steps and looked at the gray sky, her arms wrapped around her stomach, a growing weight inside her, not just of shame, or secrets. Something else. Life. She hadn't told Malcolm yet. She hadn't told anyone. But it was real. As real as the betrayal. As real as the man still writing letters from a world away, never knowing the one thing that kept him alive, was already gone. Winter blanketed Elmswood in silence. Snow covered everything, front porches, broken promises, footprints that never should have been made. Mary walked through it like a ghost, her coat clutched tight around her, her mind far away from the place she used to be. She never told Malcolm outright that she was pregnant. She didn't have to. One night, he placed his hand on her back while they were cleaning up communion trays, and his eyes fell to the slight curve beneath her dress. She saw the recognition hit him like a wave, and then he nodded. No words. No joy. Just resignation. A week later, he stopped drinking whiskey by the fire. He switched to brandy. The letters stopped arriving. Or so Mary believed. In truth, I kept writing, when I had fingers that could hold a pen, when the chaos slowed long enough for a helicopter to take us out of hell. I described the firefights. The brothers I lost. The ones who saved me. And always, always, I ended with a thought of her. If this war takes me, it won't win. Because you still have my heart. And when I see you again, it'll be yours all over again. Malcolm read that one with tears in his eyes. He folded it, placed it in his drawer instead of the fire. And then, after pacing for nearly an hour, he fed it to the flame anyway. "I'm not a monster," he whispered. I love her. But God didn't answer. Not that night. Not for a long time. Mary gave birth in the spring. A boy. Black curls, her blue eyes. Malcolm was there, holding her hand, trembling harder than she was. He never claimed the child publicly. The town whispered. They always did. Some guessed. Others pretended not to see. The church remained silent. A year later, she had a second child. A girl this time. Named her Eliza after her grandmother. The priest baptized them both. I came home in pieces. Not just scars and the bullet wound that almost took my leg, but the weight of what I've seen. What I've done. The silence from Mary had nearly broken me, but I told myself she was still there. That she just moved. That the mail was lost. That maybe she needed time. I believed, with all my heart, that she'd be waiting. When I got stateside, I didn't even call my mother first. I took a bus straight to Elmswood, duffel slung over my shoulder, my uniform hanging off a frame that had lost 20 pounds. I passed the church on my way into town. Didn't notice the two kids playing in the yard, the man in black robes smiling softly through the rectory window. I kept walking. I knew the way to her house by heart. Mary was in the kitchen, laughing. Flour on her cheeks. The baby screaming. The boy tugging at her dress. It was chaos, but it was her chaos. A life she'd accepted. One she'd stopped questioning. Until the knock came. 3 heavy thuds. She wiped her hands and opened the door. The duffel hit the floor. And then. Well, hello, dear. Her breath left her in a single gasp. Will. Standing there. Alive. Broken, yes. But alive. The silence stretched between us like a rope pulled too tight. Behind her, the boy called out, "Mama." I blinked. Looked past her. Saw the children. Saw the priest's collar hanging from the coat rack inside. And then. Everything went still. You ever picture a moment so many times you think you've lived it? Well, I had. For years, in foxholes and field tents, between bullets and blood, I imagined what it would feel like to come home. To see her face again. To hear her voice whisper my name. To wrap her in my arms and finally, feel safe. But the moment that met me on that porch was nothing like the one I've carried. 2 children. A man's coat on the rack. And Mary, older, softer, smiling like she hadn't thought of me in years. How do you come back from the dead only to realize, you've been buried for a long, long time? Come in, she whispered, but her voice had no breath behind it. I stepped inside. The floorboards creaked like they remembered me. The smell of baked bread and lavender filled the air, but all I could feel was the silence between us. I looked at the boy. Then the girl. Then back at Mary. How old? I asked. She hesitated. 3 and 1. Do the math. I did. My jaw tightened, but I didn't yell. Didn't collapse. I just nodded, slowly. 1,000 letters unanswered. The bracelet still on my wrist. And 2 children with someone else's eyes. Why didn't you tell me? I asked. Why didn't you write? She swallowed hard. I did, at first. Then, the letters stopped. I thought you were dead. I finished for her. She nodded. Tears welled, but I didn't comfort her. I couldn't. Not anymore. The door opened again. And there he was. Father Malcolm. Still wearing the black collar, but with eyes that betrayed it all. He froze when he saw me. We stared at each other, 2 men with too much history between them and not enough ground to hold it all. My voice was cold. So it was you. Malcolm didn't answer. He didn't have to. Mary turned to him, realization crashing in slow waves across her face. You took the letters. Malcolm looked at her, broken. I loved you. Loved me, she repeated, her voice rising. You let me mourn a man who was alive. I gave you a life, he snapped. When the world was falling apart, I was the only one who lied. I cut in. You lied. And you used your collar to do it. The silence that followed was deeper than any prayer. We didn't fight. There were no fists. Just words. And sometimes, those cut deeper. Malcolm left that night. Packed what little pride he had and walked away from the church, the town, and a woman who would never look at him the same again. Mary sat alone on the porch until morning, rocking slightly, the children asleep inside. Me? I didn't leave. But I didn't stay either. I walked the streets of Elmswood like a ghost, visiting the places that once held their laughter, the diner booth, the lake, the tree behind her house where we were supposed to marry. What do you do when the war ends, but you come home to find the love you fought for no longer exists? What do you say to a future that moved on without you? A week later, Mary found a letter on her windowsill. No envelope. Just folded parchment in my handwriting, the same loops and sharp edges she'd memorized a lifetime ago. I don't blame you. I don't even blame him, not completely. We all make choices when we're afraid. I just wish I hadn't died for you while still breathing. I'll leave town tomorrow. I won't come back unless you ask me to. Not because I don't love you, but because I always did. She read it 3 times. Then, quietly, she folded it in half and slipped it into a drawer she rarely opened. The children woke. The day began. Life, somehow, went on. They say wars end with treaties and handshakes. But some wars, the ones inside, they end with silence. And the sound of someone closing a door they used to walk through every day. I am William Carter. And this is my story. What would you have done, if you were me? Or her? Do you believe love can survive anything, or are some betrayals too deep to forgive? Let me know in the comments. I'll be reading every single one. Thank you.